let's move on to Trump here, because these two are related, if you ask me. And I think all of this stuff is interrelated. As it always happens when I run into people. I saw a bunch of friends I haven't seen in almost a year out on the golf course, both days, Saturday and Sunday in Los Angeles. And without exception, they're all for Trump. They're all Republicans. They're all getting worried that Trump's blowing it. And they wish he weren't. And if I heard once, I heard twice, 3 times or 4 times. Why? Rush. When the Inspector General report came out, pretty much just nailing Hillary to the wall on these emails and stuff, why was Trump off still talking about the Mexican judge? Why didn't Trump pounce on that? Then another question became, why has Trump stopped doing what got him there? Trump's not making sense to us anymore. What's? But then inevitably, after all the complaints about Trump, came observations about how the media is likewise building Hillary up and trying to destroy Trump and this kind of thing. My point here is that pretty much everybody I ran into wants Trump to win. And I'll tell you something, folks, at least among my circle, which is pretty big, the commonality is not so much that Trump is great. It's that we just can't stand Hillary. There's any more of this, and we're done. And by the same token, everything I just said, this stuff has got to stop. And that's why I tell you, I'm going to get myself in trouble here. I was prepared, whoever the Republican nominee was going to get my full-fledged support. I didn't care who it was, because this has got to stop. Not just the policy implementation that we're getting. Don't think Obama's a standalone. The entire Democrat Party's gone. The entire Democrat Party and their supporters have become full-fledged radical leftist progressives. And just like this man on the street stuff from Brooklyn, I'm telling you, it's common out there. You know, people say, I used to know a lot of Democrats, and none of this would be acceptable. They would abandon the Democrats and embarrass them. But the reason they don't is because we are the bigger enemy. Conservatives, Republicans, but people running for office opposite Democrats are the bigger enemy. And I'm here to tell you, they really do, in utter defiance of all logic and common sense, I'm talking about your average, ordinary Democrat voter, progressive, liberal, whatever you want to categorize them, they really do believe that we represent a greater threat to their way of life than any militant terrorist, any military enemy. We do. Because of what they've been taught. And folks, what they have been taught is an absolute corruption and perversion of this country's history. An absolute perversion and corruption of what the Republican Party and conservative movements are. They've been taught this from their earliest abilities to understand teaching and learning. And this has all been by design as well. Millennials are a target here. People are looking at millennials and don't understand when did we lose them? I mean, this is the first 18 to 24 generation that people can remember in a long time who've already cashed in the chips because they figured out the country's best days are behind them. And so they're willing here to become wards of the state in order to eat and have some place to live, public transportation and all. When did that happen? When did young people stop desiring to make something of themselves? I hear this all the time. And I don't know how universal that is. But economics is clearly a factor here. The government's taken more and more of what we call the economy. There's the pie that everybody hopes to have a piece of and expand is getting smaller because government keeps taking big chunks of it, like for health care. They're trying to usurp the entire energy sector now. And it doesn't work. It has never worked. Socialism, communism, it never works, but people are willing to invest in it rather than let the Republicans get the White House. Boils to Republicans hate people. That's just what it boils to. Republicans just don't like people. They don't like immigrants. They don't like women. They don't like the poor. And then you have a bunch of people believing it. And I have a friend who has a millennial daughter. So he studies them. His daughter and their friends. Let me see if he sent me a note based on his observations of what's important to them and how to reach them based on what he just heard them talking about. And he says that one of the big deals about millennials, see if you have a millennial kid or if you know a bunch of them. He said, let me just read his note to you. I just had a weekend interacting with dozens of millennials, Rush. And after listening to a weekend of it, in my opinion, if Trump simply explained how his policies and proposals are sustainable and how Hillary's are not, I think he'd go a long way to making significant inroads with them. If you own sustainability, you could end up owning millennials. And he sent me a study from Business Insider that buttresses the point made by what he heard. It's not just this weekend. His daughter's been a millennial for a while. He's been studying her and her friends. And he says the underpinning of the millennials he knows, and he's careful not to say that this represents all of them, but the underpinning of their philosophy of life stems from their views on the environment and food. The mean versus nice narrative will be Hillary's angle, and the media is going to play along. We're mean, Democrats are nice. We don't care about people, we don't love, they do. He says, I think Trump can do an end run and talk directly to the millennial audience. Now, he has his own message, but I think it dovetails with his core message. Obamacare's not sustainable, for example. They need to be told because apparently he hears them. That word sustainable is apparently something that this group of people he's been studying has been taught. It's been drilled into their heads. Sustainability, the food supply, the environment, what have you. So the message needs to be transmitted in their terms, such as Obamacare isn't sustainable. Open borders are not sustainable. Gun-free zones are not sustainable. Women and women's rights and gays' rights are simply not sustainable in a country with a strong Sharia population. An emasculated military can't sustain a nation in freedom. It goes on and on. This is what they care about, Rush, as his note to me says. We're losing the country because liberalism isn't sustainable, and these kids don't know it. They think it's the exact opposite. Now, I don't know if that reflects similarly with things that you hear from millennial-aged people. But the study here, Business Insider, an emerging retail trend is key for attracting millennials. The millennial generation has a wider range of choices than any generation before them. Steve Easterbrook, global chief brand officer for McDonald's, told the Wall Street Journal in 2014. They are promiscuous in their brand loyalty. It makes it harder work for all of us. Promiscuous meaning they don't have single choices. The rule of thumb used to be that if you haven't gotten to somebody by age 20, you say you're selling beer. If you haven't got them hooked on Budweiser by age 20, you're never going to get them. Beer advertising has always been aimed at young, just arriving consumers. That you don't advertise for people in their 30s and 40s. They've made their choice. This guy is saying that millennials are not wedded to a single brand like previous generations have been, and that's what promiscuous in their brand loyalty means. It means that there's so many choices for them, so many fast food places, so many different kinds of cars, so many different, that they don't just end up choosing one. Many of the world's most successful consumer product companies freely admit they are struggling to bond with millennial consumers, the 18 to 34-year-olds now moving into their prime spending years. And today there are about 75 million of them. We recently conducted a series of focus groups seeking insights into millennial consumers' beliefs and priorities. And in the course of these sessions, millennials told us that they can strongly identify with consumer brands that have a status or advertise the lifestyle that they like to live by or that they would like to live by, do live by or like to. Millennials also said they are drawn to brands that reflect their deeply held personal values. And here is a consensus thought from two different millennial focus groups. Quote, I like to think forward. For me, sustainability trumps convenience. So what this guy is hearing with his daughter and her friends in the millennial, but sustainability seems to be relevant. To delve deeper into the value that millennial consumers place on sustainability, A.T. Carney and the NPD Group conducted an online survey. More than 200 millennials said which, if any, of a company's sustainability practices are most important to them when purchasing a car, food, personal care products, consumer electronics, apparel, household cleaning products. Our finding suggests that the time may be right for consumer companies to take a fresh look at the value propositions they offer millennials. For example, when marketing to young adults, many companies tout their commitment to corporate social responsibility. However, the tangible impact of this strategy is limited because while millennials clearly want to do business to be a force for good in the world, many seem to view CSR as mere table stakes. Millennials demand, here's the pull quote, millennials demand for sustainable products, not just socially responsible companies, represents an important shift in consumer priority. Now, what is this? What is sustainable products? What would you, off the top of your head, what are we talking about here? Millennials demand for sustainable products. Well, for example, when asked specifically about buying a car, the baby boomers we surveyed most frequently said they would prefer to buy a car made in America. Millennials most often said they want a car that uses little to no fuel and is good for the environment. I'm just telling you, they have bought climate change through and through. I read the first couple chapters of a book that is huge among young people, Ready Player One. Have you heard of it? Oh, wait. It was so eye-opening. What we're up against with millennials, what they think, what they've been taught. They're not thinking in it. What they have been taught. This environmental global warming, destroy the planet stuff. They bought it. They have hook, line, and sinker. It's not a question anymore. It's an ontological, certifiable, truthful occurrence. It's happening each and every. And guess who is seen as not caring about it? The Republicans. Exactly right. Now, I tell you who told me about Ready Player One. Joel Cerno. I was playing golf with Joel on Saturday. Have you heard of this book? I said, no. He said, well, let me tell you something. Spielberg, he listed off a bunch of names of people who are getting ready to make the movie version of it. And it's the creme de la creme of Hollywood producers. I've forgotten some of the names, and since I don't want to guess. But I do remember he said Spielberg. They're all looking at producing it. Folks, and I went because I bought it on the golf course. I bought the ebook version on the golf course, I think on the 16th hole when he was telling me about it. And I had some time, I guess Saturday night, to start reading it. I read the first 4 or 5 chapters. I think I'm going to read an excerpt to you in the segment next hour before getting full bore into the Trump stuff. But it's from 2011. It's not a new book. It's 5 years old. It's fiction. It's dystopian. It is the opposite of utopia. It's. Let me just tell you, the guy that wrote the book is Ernest Cline. In 2012, it received an Alex Award from the Young Adult Library Services Association division of the American Library Association, which means it's aimed at kids, millennials, and young people. Spielberg is doing the movie adaptation. Production is starting in the fall. Most people in this now it's sci-fi, I understand all that, but don't forget the influence here. Most people live in what are called the stacks. This is after global warming has destroyed everything. All the fossil fuels are gone because we did not start alternative energy soon enough. And so now what people live in are mobile homes stacked on top of each other 20 and 30 feet high in the suburbs of cities that are gone. They are wastelands. They live, and it's the stacks. And these RVs, in order to use up less land, these mobile homes, and the description of life in these things is absolutely horrid. But it's, as I say, it's science fiction, and that's the thing. Young people are going to read this, and they're going to combine it with everything that they have been taught so far and think this is the natural conclusion of where we're headed if we don't get a handle here on climate change and stop using all this fossil fuel and start getting into alternative. For the longest time, we've thought all this stuff was so ridiculous that people would end up laughing at it like we did. But no, they've been hoovering it up as though it's gospel. So I think I will read just this, because it's what we're up against, folks. That's why, Trump versus Hillary, it's anybody versus the Democrats have got to lose. This stuff has to be stopped. Or there's always going to be an America, but it may not look like one that you've recognized for a while. Okay, coming up in the next hour, a brief excerpt from this book, Ready Player One, and it's going to be made into a movie, which is going to have its own impact on the target audience, which would be millennials and sci-fi fans, and they vote Democrat. And we'll get into Trump and Lewandowski, what's going on with the Trump campaign, all coming up here when we get into our next hour right after this. Don't go anywhere. Meeting and surpassing all audience expectations every day. Rush Limbaugh, your guiding light. Times of trouble, confusion, murkiness, tumult, chaos, distortion, perversion, corruption, and even the good times. I am your guiding light. Great to have you here. Telephone number 800-282-2882. Now, what I'm doing here is trying to keep you up to speed on what younger generations are considering important and who they listen to, what influences them and leads them to vote the way they do. Now, it's always tricky because younger generations, by definition, are not as knowledgeable as their elders. They haven't lived as long. They don't have as many experiences, but that doesn't matter because they don't believe that. They think they know everything, which is we all did when we were their age. But never mind that. The fact is that they are targeted by advertisers. They are targeted by pretty much every consumer group, movies, books, newspapers, music, you name it. They are the targets because it is felt that by the time you get to 45, 40, you pretty much have made your consumer choices in terms of products, even though the vast majority of disposable income is in the 48 to 54 and up demographic. There's far more disposable income there than in the millennial group. The choices have been made in large part by the quote-unquote adults. But the key to this is to remember that Hollywood's political, and Hollywood is a primary tool that's used. And same thing with the entertainment industry, wherever you find it, in books, TV shows. It's part of the whole agenda advancement apparatus of the American left. The pop culture where you don't find conservatism much at all. And so I'm on point, is the thrust of my comment. I'm not veering away from what's important here. Quite the contrary. I'm using this as an opportunity to inform you of things that otherwise you wouldn't even know are going on unless you are parents and you stay closely involved with your kids to understand what they believe and why, particularly if it differs from the way you raise them. They are being bombarded by every potential industry that wants their business. And the Democrat Party is an industry that wants their business. Their business equals vote. And they have many avenues to reach them. And entertainment and pop culture is near the top of the list, if not the top. Education is another area that has been corrupted by the left for the express purpose of demonizing and destroying Republicans, anybody that's not a leftist. So I was told about this book on Saturday, and that Spielberg is producing, got the movie adaptation. Production starting in the fall. Now, normally people, come on, Rush, you gotta, they all like the Beatles at one point, but they grow out of it and so forth. I don't look at it that. I think it's important. This stuff's important. You want to figure out why they vote, why they think what they think. More importantly, you want to know what. So when I was reading this book, I had no idea what it was. It was when it was told to me, it was Rush. I can't explain it. You just got to read it. But it's you'll be dazzled with the writing and so forth. It's okay. So Ready Player One is from 2011. It's science fiction. It's dystopian. The author is Ernest Cline. It's gotten all kinds of awards. And let me just read to you an excerpt, because the book, I think, is a representation of what people already think. And to people who don't already think this way, it is going to be a huge influence, or probably has been. I don't know how many young people have read it. I think it's popular enough that Spielberg's making a movie out of it. So here's the excerpt. This is chapter 4, I think, if I recall. Let's see, did it mention that when I printed it out? No, the chapter's not mentioned, but it's early on. It's as far as I've gotten. The lead character and narrator is named Wade, and he's a nerd and a geek and an outcast. He has been laughed at and made fun of his whole life. He doesn't have any friends except fellow geeks, and really only one or two. Virtual reality is how they live. They never leave their homes. They go to school in virtual reality. Nothing is real. Everything is a VR headset. That's how they travel. It's how they go to school. It's how they date. They don't leave home. Everything is a VR headset. Because the real world is so bad. They have had to create fantasy lives and fantasy worlds. And this guy is, at this point in the book, he's lamenting that nobody told him the truth earlier in his life. The real truth about humanity and life and America. He says, I wish somebody had just told me. And now imagine your 16, 17, 18, 25, 30-year-old reading this, is the point. And imagine watching a movie made of this. I wish someone had just told me the truth right up front, as soon as I was old enough to understand it. I wish somebody had just said, here's the deal, Wade. You're something called a human being. That's a really smart kind of animal. Like every other animal on this planet, we are descended from a single-celled organism that lived millions of years ago. This happened by a process called evolution, and you'll learn more about that later. Now, Wade, that story you heard about how we were all created by a super powerful dude named God who lives up in the sky, it's total BS, Wade. The whole God thing's actually an ancient fairy tale that people have been telling one another for thousands of years. We made it all up, like Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny. Oh, by the way, Wade, there's no Santa Claus. There's no Easter Bunny. There never have been. All BS. Sorry, kid, deal with it. You're probably wondering what happened before you got here. What happened before you were born? Well, an awful lot of stuff happened, Wade. Once we evolved into humans, things got pretty interesting. We figured out how to grow food and domesticate animals so we didn't have to spend all of our time hunting. Our tribes got much bigger. We spread across the entire planet like an unstoppable virus. Then, after fighting a bunch of wars with each other over land, resources, and our made-up gods, we eventually got all of our tribes organized into a global civilization. But honestly, it wasn't all that organized or civilized, Wade. And we continued to fight a lot of wars with each other, but we also figured out how to do science, But, of course, that's where the bad news comes in, Wade. You see, our global civilization came at a huge cost. You see, we needed a whole bunch of energy to build it. And we got that energy by burning fossil fuels, which came from dead plants and animals buried deep in the ground. We used up most of this fuel before you were born, Wade, and now it's pretty much all gone. This means that we no longer have enough energy to keep our civilization running like it was before. So we've had to cut back big time. We call it the global energy crisis, and it's been going on for a while now. It turns out, Wade, this is the big thing, that burning all those fossil fuels, it had some nasty side effects, like raising the temperature of our planet and screwing up the environment. So now the polar ice caps are melting, sea levels are rising, and the weather is all screwed up. Plants and animals are dying off in record numbers, and lots of people are starving and homeless. And we're still fighting wars with each other, mostly over the few resources that we have left. Basically, kid, what this all means is that life is a lot tougher than it used to be in the good old days, back before you were born. Things used to be awesome, but now they're kind of terrifying. To be honest, the future doesn't look too bright. You were born at a pretty crappy time in history, Wade. It looks like things are only going to get worse from here on out. Human civilization's in decline. Some people even say it's collapsing. You're probably wondering what's going to happen to you. Well, that's easy. The same thing's going to happen to you that has happened to every other human being who has ever lived. You're going to die. We're all going to die. That's just how it is. And what happens when you die, Wade? Well, we're not completely sure, but the evidence seems to suggest that nothing happens. You're just dead. Your brain stops working, and you're not around anymore to ask annoying questions. Those stories you've heard about heaven, well, no more pain or death. You live forever in a state of perpetual happiness. That's total BS, Wade. Just like all that God stuff. There's no evidence of a heaven, and there never was. We made that up, too. Wishful thinking. So now you have to live the rest of your life knowing you're going to die someday and disappear forever. Sorry. Okay, on second thought, maybe honesty isn't the best policy after all. Maybe it isn't a good idea to tell a newly arrived human being that he's been born into a world of chaos, pain, and poverty just in time to watch everything fall to pieces. See, I discovered all of that gradually over several years, and it still made me feel like jumping off a bridge. Luckily, I had access to the Oasis, which is the virtual reality video game that everybody lives in this book. The book's about the guy who created it and who died and left a giant game. Anybody who figured out the answer to his game would get his $240 billion fortune. And so the book is about people that try to figure out the game, which is I haven't got far enough to know exactly what it is, but it's like deciphering a bunch of computer code to get to the end of a giant puzzle. And the story of the book is it's so hard it's impossible to do. But anyway, the video game kept me sane. The video game allowed me to think I was living life. The video game allowed me, by virtual reality, to go to school, to learn history, and so forth. Anyway, it's just pessimism, it's dystopia, all rooted in the fact that global warming destroyed everything. And, of course, all of the traditions and beliefs that propelled and guided humanity were all a bunch of lies. Now, I know it's entertainment. I know it's a book. I understand all of that. But how many people already believe this stuff? You know as well as I do, it's a huge number. How many people are already being taught this stuff in their classrooms? And one of the most puzzling things for me is when you have this contest between liberalism and conservatism. Liberalism is doom. It's pessimism. It is the end of everything. It's how you've been lied to. It's how you have no chance. The only prayer you have is voting for Democrats and relying on the government, because everything else is a fraud that will use you, eat you up, chew you up, and spit you out. Liberalism is the most pessimistic thing I have ever seen successfully sold. Now, admittedly, it's not sold purely as pessimism, but it's filled with doom and gloom. Liberalism is nothing but doom and gloom. Liberalism is a way to justify never amounting to anything. Liberalism is a way to justify never accomplishing anything. Liberalism is what you invest in if you want to end up a schlub and have an excuse for it. There isn't any optimism in it. When you dig down, drill down really deep, and there isn't any optimism. Everything's on the come. Do this, do that, and we're going to end up in this glorious utopia that you talk about heaven not existing. Let me tell you what doesn't exist. Utopia doesn't exist. There's no socialism, communism, or any other ism that's ever gotten close to it. The closest that's ever gotten to utopia is capitalism. And, of course, it has been summarily destroyed in the minds of many via the public education system and the university system as well. So that's that. A movie is coming with this theme, not enough to impact this election, but it's just, added to all the other stimuli out there that has created this sense of it's over, we missed it, the best days in life are behind us. And so all we can hope for is sustainability, just maybe maintain what we've got. That's why we got to buy the right products and go to the right things and not overdo this. That's just a life of denial. I've never seen pessimism so successfully sold as liberalism has been.